Right, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making time to join the latest of our At the Coalface sessions today. Thanks for giving up your time. I know time is precious. There's lots of events going on online and in person now as well. So giving up an hour of your time means a lot to us, and also hopefully it'll be of use for you as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Aaron Chauhan. I am a lawyer and I run the law firm Tenet. We specialise in compliance, regulation advice, disputes and investigations arising out of fraud and financial crime. We have done a few episodes about the Coalface, and At the Coalface is really about the front-facing people who are out there combating, fighting and dealing with fraud, be it from a range of perspectives. And previous episodes have covered procurement fraud, looking at disrupting fraud through the power of language. We've looked at issues around financial services and technology. And today we're going to be talking about honest dishonesty and creating looking at the whole pressure of chasing a career and where dishonesty can come in to that kind of process. So in the chat, you'll find some of our previous episodes. Please go and have a look if you haven't seen those episodes before. So as I say, today we're looking at chasing a career and insider fraud, what we've been calling honest dishonesty. I'm very lucky to have Claire Maillet with me today as our guest. And Claire, could I just ask you to do a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining. So I'm Claire Maillet. I'm a counter-fraud academic. So I've been working in the counter-fraud space for just over 10 years. I'm also doing a PhD looking at insider fraud in my spare time, which says a lot about me as a person, I think. I also do a lot of disability awareness, mental health awareness as well, as I am a person who stammers. And I do a load of other various things, which I'm sure Aaron is going to come on to shortly.
Brilliant, Claire. Yeah, I think I was joking when I was looking at all the things you do. We could probably take about 45 minutes about how much you get through, and it is amazing the work you do for helping on fraud prevention and counter fraud and Fincrime compliance. Right, so the structure today, the way we tend to do things at the Coalface sessions is I pick on about 5 points where Claire and I will talk through, and what we'll do on those 5 points are the ones that are on the invite, the reality behind career success. We're going to just talk about the myth of LinkedIn. Claire and I are quite active on LinkedIn, so let's talk about that a bit. Insider fraud and career pressure, really what drives insider fraud and how much is career pressure a factor in insider fraud, challenges in fraud prevention and financial crime careers in terms of the compliance world and certainly from the legal perspective. What are the challenges? And again, dovetailing into where are the risks for insider fraud. We're going to talk about people skills in high pressure environments, communication, patience, emotional intelligence, all the skills needed and why those skills are needed, and probably touching on some of the dark arts people use to get promotions at work and how does that fit into the world where we're creating dishonesty or let's say sharp practice to advance. And then if we have time, navigating career progression. So we'll talk about that type of issue as well. So I was saying to Claire before we started that I've been at the opticians at the weekend. I've got some new glasses. So now I'm in that little mode where I'm either with glasses on or glasses off. So I'm glasses on for a while as I try to read some notes and lead our way in. So let's talk about LinkedIn, Claire. Let's talk about the reality behind career success. And what you and I started to talk about was this myth of LinkedIn. Now, you and I are both pretty active on LinkedIn. I think people might see that. And so I was looking at your career and some of the things you talked about. So I'm just going to read through some of the things I've seen about you on the internet in a career perspective. Previously director of financial crime operations at a payment services firm. You've got lots of awards and lots of nominations, things like the Outstanding Tackling Economic Crime Professional, 11 times finalist at the Tecker Awards. You do a lot in the disability and inclusion of workspace. You've got your consultancy, the Stammerers Through University Consultancy. Not only do you do that, you've got podcasts. You run Fraudable, which is, anyone who hasn't heard it, please look at the episodes of Fraudable. Academic theory and practice merged together for each episode. You've got the whole issue about imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud, and those issues for those working in counter fraud space. Because you're bored, you did a PhD in criminal justice studies on insider fraud in fintech. You're fluent in French and you're a qualified dance teacher. So my question is, objectively, I'm reading all that and I'm thinking your career is a success, right? So I'm thinking, why do you have to do so much on LinkedIn? Because it makes me think that everything on LinkedIn is a bit of a myth. Why do it if you've achieved so much already?
Yeah, yeah, it's quite scary when you read all that, to be honest. You make me
Scary.
sound like
I'm going to
um
quit. I've got no hope in catching up.
I think for me, I mean, this definitely, like most things, it stems back to my childhood. Without making this sort of sound like a therapy session. Um, I had an upbringing where my parents obviously wanted the best for me. They were not pushy, but I could always do more. I could always be better. Um, I once scored 97% in a French exam in year 4, and I told my parents I was over the moon, and they were like, "Why didn't you get 100?" And so it's that sort of mentality that's kind of stuck in my mind. Um, I went to a private uh, uh, primary school where you were just put against one another, always had to be the best. If you were second, why did you bother? And then a selective and grammar school where if you didn't apply to Oxbridge, why were you even in school? Don't bother if you're not going to apply for Oxbridge. And it was always a case of, you need to make your CV look great. You need to make sure that the top universities want to take you on. So volunteer, do a job, all of these kinds of things to make you look better and more sellable to like, and just make you look more appealing. And I kind of thought that once I got to university and got my degree, that I would sort of no longer feel the need to be like that. But no, it's definitely carried on. And yes, I do a lot of things, but I think there's part of it from I need to do more, I need to be better, I need to just be this person that does as much as they can to help people and to raise awareness of various things. But also there's a proactive side of me where I just get really annoyed if there's a problem and someone doesn't solve it, and I just think, oh, it's fine, I'll just do it myself, as opposed to waiting for someone to pick up the gauntlet. So it's a bit of a mishmash of things, I guess. But yes, I'm very aware that I do a lot of stuff, and it doesn't come without the negative side, such as burnout and mental health issues and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying it's a thing that everyone should do, but it doesn't all sort of come across as, look at me, I've done all these things.
Yeah, I get that. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, what I'm hearing is it's not success at all costs, it's constant improvement. But it's that pressure to continually improve.
Yeah.
And I think, if I think about myself and, I love and I loathe LinkedIn because I don't think it's representative of the real me, in the sense that, I'm still the kid in the playground. A bit like at a networking event, I think I'm not worthy of someone's connection. So I struggle to go up and talk to people and think I've got anything interesting to say. And I remember being like that as a kid. And, you put yourself out of your comfort zone on LinkedIn, or you go and do talks, and you're doing it because you're trying to improve. You think you can make a difference.
Yeah.
In my case, run a small firm, trying to win work. You're trying to get credibility. But, one thing that made me think, knowing you and knowing how nice you are, and generally, look at how amount of stuff you do on LinkedIn, and then thinking about myself, like, the connectivity to how people behave in the workplaces, it makes me feel like career pressure, or that objectivity to succeed, can make people act out of character. And do you think that's the world we're living in now, that more people are almost having to act out of character? And is that a potential lead or link to risk in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. And I think up to a point I was not being myself on LinkedIn, but this was years and years ago. I felt the need. I guess when I was first starting out in the counter fraud industry, I was an analyst, and I joined LinkedIn, and I was connecting with all of these really senior people, and I felt like I needed to try and be on the same level as them. And you think, how on earth are you going to do that? Because you've been in the industry for 5 minutes and you're connecting with like MLROs and CEOs. So there's no way that I'd be able to be like, hi, I've got interesting things to say. So I think back then, I maybe sort of acted out a persona to sort of help me in that progression, but purely from a learning perspective, purely for me to be able to learn more about the industry, to connect with people, not to fake my way to the top as previous employers have suggested that I've been doing. But I think a few years ago, I did start to become myself on LinkedIn. So I do think, in my view, hopefully, the LinkedIn me is the same as the real me, because I am open on there. I am very vulnerable. I've spoken about my eating disorder, my stammer, work struggles, and that sort of thing. So I do think I am my real self on there, and I'd be genuinely upset if people thought that what they read on LinkedIn wasn't really me, because I do think I am myself on there. But I get that it takes a certain position in someone's career that they feel like they can be themselves. So I think, to an extent, yes, that there will be people who aren't themselves on there because they feel, for whatever reason, they have to come across a certain way. But I like to think that I broke that trend within myself a few years ago, because it adds to the authenticity side of things. I like to think that people would look at my LinkedIn and see it as different from other people's. It isn't all just, I got this award, I've started a new job, all of this positive stuff. You need to balance that, in my view, with the struggles, and the struggle to get funding, and the promotions that you didn't get. And like, I'm just very open to being vulnerable to people, and I've been like that for a few years now. But I get that it's not for everyone. I absolutely understand that. And so, yes, absolutely, going back to what you're saying about the risk side of things, it is definitely feasible that if someone feels the need to always do better, to always get the promotion, to always get pay rises, that can lead to unethical, immoral behavior in the workplace, especially when LinkedIn is just so full of people who are doing all of these amazing, wonderful things. And everybody will get to that stage where they think, I'm not anything like these people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing. I mean, I know you're authentic on LinkedIn because I know you, and I know, we try to do the same thing, which is just say it as it is.
Yeah.
But I think the out of character comment, I think, is I wouldn't necessarily, but for LinkedIn, be going out telling the world that I'm having a crap day, or this is a real struggle, or that's just being honest. But the need to amplify yourself out there in the wider community, and I'm just and I think you're right, it does lead to that. I've written down here about the pressure a workplace can build on us to make good people do bad things. It's not saying certainly you and I would do bad things, but how many workplaces are there out there where people are just seeing everyone seemingly having great success, be it on LinkedIn or otherwise, or in the workplace, and they feel they have to go further to achieve that success. And I just wonder whether employers should have that as a factor, be it from a HR perspective or otherwise, as an early stage indicator or risk in relation to potential fraud. Go on.
Yeah, I think it's a really good concept, but I don't know how it would work in practice, because then you're sort of going into the realms of your employer tracking your LinkedIn, looking at everything you post, looking at every comment that you make, and there's always going to be that sort of balance between to what extent are we mitigating the risk and to what extent are we actually invading someone's privacy.
Yeah,
because in my perspective, like I should be allowed to post whatever I want to on LinkedIn, in my view, so long as it abides by the policies that my employer has in place.
Yeah, I think that.
But then I think if you then take it to the extent of, if I'm starting and to post that I have mental health problems on the internet, then to what extent should my employer intervene? If I'm doing it purely from an awareness raising perspective, then I would say no, that we can leave that be. But if I'm actually saying I'm having a mental health crisis, then should that be on LinkedIn anyway? But then to what extent can the employer feel like that's within their remit? And I think that's a very murky area, because I can understand it from both perspectives.
No, I think it's murky here, and I suppose I'm not advocating that employers monitor LinkedIn, but more so that employers are mindful of the culture that's causing people to feel that they have to go out and push themselves much further, externally and internally, to achieve career success, or we'll talk about meritocracy in a bit. A few years ago, probably a little plug for us, we did a white paper called Leading to Loss, and we'll put a link up in the chat to it. And that was basically looking at pressure, the classic fraud triangle fun stuff, but taking pressure and looking at a subset of pressure, and looking at it from the perspective of leadership. And if leadership creates a fractured culture, it leads to people being disenchanted. So you've got this is how we do things around here, then we've got actually this is how things happen on the shop floor, and there's quite a disconnect. People become disenchanted and start to do the right thing for them rather than the right thing.
Yeah.
And that whole side of leadership, I think, I was trying to say, well, look, that is an unwitting cause of risk. So when we do fraud investigations, we try and look at all the root theories and causes around it to understand why people do what they do. And I was just wondering, when you did your PhD, or you were doing your PhD on the insider fraud risk, to what extent do you think leadership's a factor in terms of like their unwitting involvement in causing the risk, or rather than that real outright leadership driving fraudulent behavior?
Yeah, it's a huge part of my thesis, which is coming out in 2026. Brace yourselves, folks. It's a really interesting thing, because people talk about company culture and they talk about it like it's an actual thing, but it's an inanimate object. It's the people within it that make the culture. And so, yes, it does all come back to the people, and I think that people forget that a lot. Also, mental health of employees also features with regards to being able to ensure that your staff feel supported, and then that essentially reduces the influence of staff feeling that they need to perpetrate fraud in order to survive. So that's also part of it. And I think that it's really interesting, specifically because I'm looking at the fintech space. And that also sort of leads on to startups. And there are so many startups being made, right, every day. And their primary goal is to make money. Their secondary goal is probably to actually help the customers that they're serving. And so actually, if you start putting in place the suggestion that the staff that you're hiring might commit fraud, they don't want to know. They do not want to know. And I get it to an extent, because people hire people that they think will do the job well. They think they're hiring ethical people. And so if you suddenly start to feed in the idea, well, actually, some of your colleagues might be doing something that they shouldn't do, no one wants to admit it. So add that to the goal of we need to expand quickly, we need to grow quickly, we need to have aggressive expansion and profits, and to go with that, as soon as someone in the risk or the governance or the compliance space goes, have you considered this? They're just not going to be listened to unless you have senior risk people building the company from the ground up. Whereas I fear that most people who start companies aren't necessarily from that background, that sort of industry.
So that makes me start to think about leadership's acceptance of their role and the potential risk. So I'm going to go highbrow here for one moment, because I know you're not used to it with me at all. So I was looking at two things. One thing I've talked about before, but another. So I was looking at the Harvard Business Review. There's an article in that. That's the highbrow piece. And then I was looking at an article, and I was also looking at a book about, why do people do it? Why do people commit fraud in the senior workplace? But this Harvard Business Review article says why people lie at work and what to do about it. And it talks about and tries to understand why employees, what are they trying to accomplish by lying? And it comes up with three typical motivations. So employees are upset in terms of triggering conflict. They don't want to upset someone, be it for not hitting their numbers or something. They don't want to have that conflict, so they hide stuff or they manipulate things. Something we've been talking about before, insecurities, not wanting to expose their inadequacies. And the other one is trying to serve their own ends, personal goals, advancing their own career. Let's say we'll talk about dark arts and stuff later, but if you've found from your research that it's difficult to get leadership to even engage about considering internal fraud risk, is it almost impossible to get leadership to engage that they could be a cause of internal fraud risk?
Yeah, I think so, because...
Right, episode's finished. We're done.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, because I think that if the concept itself, purely as a concept, can't be accepted or acknowledged, then going a step or two further and saying, well, actually, you could be causing that, it isn't going to land. It just isn't going to land. And the process for me to actually obtain participants to interview as part of my research was so difficult, and I was very naive when I thought it would be easy. I thought that everyone would want to speak about it, and to an extent that was the case. There were lots of practitioners who said, I would absolutely love to talk about this because no one's talking about it. I think it's an excellent piece of research. However, my boss won't let me, my CEO won't let me, my MLRO won't let me. And that in itself speaks volumes, I think, because the research itself is completely anonymous. So I'm not going to say that, and Claire from Barclays said this, but the fact that even though the anonymity is there, and there are still companies who are like, I don't want you going near that research, that to me says arguably more than the people who actually did contribute. So I think that just as a whole, there's this sense of denial. And I think that you only get to the stage of accepting it when you are hit by an insider fraud. Otherwise, why would, hello, shadows come to listen. Why else would you acknowledge something so unethical, so immoral, until you've been hit by it yourself? So actually, lots of companies that I speak to don't have anything in place for insider fraud, but as soon as they're hit by it, they then hire people in, they put all the controls in, funding comes off the trees, it comes out of nowhere. So I think it's that acknowledgement of people people will only do something about it after it's become a problem. They don't want to acknowledge the risk before you then have to go to your board and say, sorry guys, we've lost a few $100,000 to an insider fraud. And I think it's the same with various crime types too. So actually various controls aren't actually put in place until the number of thefts goes up to a certain point, or the number of murders reaches a certain point. I think there's that maybe fear, maybe denial, maybe lack of funding that means that people just won't do anything about a problem until they can actually prove on paper that this is now an actual problem.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think when I've dealt with some employee fraud investigations, I remember one for an architect's practice, and this is all about corporate maturity, really. Whatever size of the business, it's about corporate maturity. And the MD of this quite sizable architect's practice, their head of operations, had been stealing money for about 4 years, setting up false nominal codes on their accounts and taking money away. And then we went off and got disclosure of bank statements, got a freezing injunction, all the fun stuff. And we found one of the things that the employee had bought was a holiday for herself and 3 friends for 39 grand for, I think, 10 days. It was a nice holiday, and we were within 30 days of the holiday, so we couldn't cancel or get any money back for the employee. But the approach of that leader in that organization was, like many organizations, it's altruistic. We believe no one will do bad things here, so we don't need to put focus on it. And then when I've delved deeper into this area, I think actually leaders create the risk of people wanting to either achieve more or gain more to an extent. And that's a factor that needs to be put in on, I suppose, everybody's business-wide risk assessment if we're going to proper documents and things. But it makes me think also about this challenges that, if we just look at, we're running our gig in a law firm in this space, you're developing and driving forward your career in fraud, financial crime compliance prevention. It's a high pressured world. I think we talked about this before on your podcast. And, Fincrime teams, counter fraud teams, business prevention units, whatever the label we want to give them. There's a lot to juggle because we're always seen as a barrier. We're also dealing with rapidly evolving typologies, threats, new rules and regs. We can talk about all the APP stuff that happened recently. So how have you balanced your career in trying to advance it with those pressures we've discussed that we put on ourselves, pressures in the workplace? How do you manage all of that, basically, of just wanting to get on with your job and do a good thing and make a difference, is where you started this episode?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there are some people who feel and have openly said to me that I talk a load of crap on LinkedIn and that I'm not qualified in any way, shape or form, and I've managed to sort of fake my way to the top, which really stings. Like, it really stings. But I think in this industry, it's kind of, it just becomes part and parcel of what you have to do. I don't think you can sort of work in the industry without acknowledging that you are going to have to balance all of these various things. And by way of advancing, do you mind? By way of advancing in the industry, I think your own sort of dedication comes into it. I've had the pleasure of being able to manage some amazing people. And then I've also managed some people who just do the job because it pays a bill. And the difference in managing people who are interested in the space and genuinely want to do it well, and actually managing people who just do it to pay the bills, is a huge difference. It's enormous. And please don't show the audience your bottom. Thank you. And so I think from a career progression standpoint, I think it's just as much down to you as it is your managers, your colleagues, your wider network as well. I mean, I'd say well over a third of the opportunities that I've had wouldn't have been possible without the network that I have. And I honestly don't know how I would have had those opportunities had I not been linked to those people. So I think it's a definite mix between what I do and the network I have and the people I work with as well. And I think also going back to the point you made on LinkedIn about us being on there quite a lot. I schedule posts, so I'm not on there always, like all day, every day, just to make that clear. And I think also, if I can segue slightly into the disability side of things, is sure. I only started speaking at conferences 2 years ago. I wouldn't go near a conference before then, because I just wasn't confident enough in my socializing, speaking abilities. And so actually, any chance that I get to write something as opposed to say something, I will do it. The people who are unfortunate enough to have my mobile number know that I can write WhatsApp messages longer than my PhD thesis. I will just happily do that because I don't have to speak. And so for me to be able to essentially word vomit on LinkedIn, for me, is my way of communicating, because up until recently, I would not be the sort of person to go up onto a stage and say, this is what I think about stuff. I just wouldn't go there. So to an extent, I still use LinkedIn as a platform, as my primary form of communication, because of my stammer. So I think there's another sort of avenue as to why I'm on LinkedIn so much, because I use typing as an alternative to me speaking when I don't feel confident enough to do so, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I think it makes me think that, you know, when, again, if I keep tying it back to pressures in the workplace,
yeah,
it's about understanding that different people, I guess, will be a better version of themselves through different forms of communication, different forms of channeling their ability.
Yeah.
And I guess if there's a one size fits all in your workplace as to how people can gain advancement despite all the pressures, and that's going to get, either going to create a silo, or it's going to create, you know, the whole concept of good people maybe doing something slightly bad to get advancement. And I'm not even sure that's for you, me to answer, but I'm just trying to think about, how do people stay motivated? How do people keep their moral compass pointing due north if they see others getting advancement in their careers in the workplace, but they're just doing the best they can do with what they've got? But that is very good. But they see others, I suppose we're drifting into, I don't know what, you know, other ways of getting promotion. You know, right, going to networking events where they don't like to be out at networking events, but others do that and they get ahead.
Yeah.
What's your message, I guess, to businesses for recognizing, don't create a troublesome work environment which can cause people to act out of character, and B, for people being themselves?
I think if I were in that situation, so if I saw other people within my company being recognized and promoted, etc., I think to an extent I would tell myself to get out of that company and to change jobs, because yes, you're going to have it in many companies, but if you're surrounded by that, if you are, let's say, more easily influenced than others, and if you see other people going places, getting promotions and things, if you feel like being surrounded by those people is going to sort of alter your view on things and your ethical compass, then I would say get out of that company. Because yes, understandably, it is very difficult to stay on the straight and narrow if you're seeing other people do things that just shouldn't be done. And I think this also comes into the whistleblowing side of things, which I could talk about for, hours and
Well,
hours.
let's talk about it.
For hours and hours?
No, not for hours. We've got
Strap
about.
in, guys.
I actually forgot to say that's about questions at the end of the session. So if anyone's got any questions and you're out there, I forgot to mention, pop them in the chat. We will try and deal with it at the end, but not hours and hours. Maybe like 3 or 4 minutes of whistleblowing.
Can we lock people on this call so they actually can't leave?
We could do.
I think that yeah, it also links to the whistleblowing side of things, because you've seen in the news how whistleblowers can be treated, and it really does sort of make people question, so why would I bother whistleblowing? Because I've seen that people normally get sacked, they have to go to court, they spend so much money on these cases, and actually, does anything happen? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And so I think if you are in a situation where you're surrounded by people who are doing the wrong thing to get ahead, and you don't feel comfortable speaking up about it, that's not the company for you. That will fit a certain type of individual down and to the ground, and they will happily work there. Fine. If that's your thing, fine. But for others, it won't be.
Does that mean, though, say you're in an environment where you're seeing other people getting advancement in their career without it being a meritocracy, or you see other bad behaviour, is the advice, maybe it's not the right place for you? That's never so easy for some people, I guess. Yeah, but equally, for me, there's a worry that that's already an immediate reaction to whistleblowing function won't work here.
Yeah.
There's no point in even engaging with it.
Yeah.
And I know, obviously, whistleblowers UK have got the awareness week next week. There is more about this going on. There's more publicity around whistleblowing, but I always thought it's something about careers and in the workplace. Yeah, whistleblowing can be a regulatory control. You and I've talked about that before as well. There's this oddity with whistleblowing, which is I want to blow the whistle and I want my anonymity. And that way I feel protected and I can raise this concern or risk in the workplace. But equally, if it was a great working environment, you should be confident enough, maybe, could people say, to go and talk to your line manager. So is it possible that organisations that have more whistleblowing have got a bigger leadership management problem? If you look at it in that context.
Yeah. And I've raised concerns in previous companies, and I've noticed it. I've said to my manager that this is going on, and they've said, "Yeah, absolutely agree. Let me take it higher." And then they've been shut down. So right. I don't think it's even just a centralized, this is something that I believe in issue. I think it also affects the people who are also part of the whistleblowing process. So the people who are the ones who are signposted as the people to report to in the first place, if they don't have the authority to be able to take that further on your behalf as well, then that also says more about the company culture. And I think that's why people instantly feel the need that actually they should just leave the company that they're working in, because I imagine that they're weighing up in their minds, is it worth me reporting this, potentially having to go to court or to spend the X amount of money on this problem and hope that it gets sorted out, or shall I just quietly quit? And I think it's that balance in their mind that might lead people to think, actually, it's not worth the hassle. And actually just find that leaving is the best way. And I think that even though in the and company policies, company processes, it says if you spot any wrongdoing, report it. It's all very well and good having it written down, but in practice, it's not that simple at all. And I think that's what leads people to think, is it actually worth the hassle of me going through this whole process? So I think there needs to be an entire overhaul of the whistleblowing and policies, processes, law, etc., etc., because I can't guarantee that if I spotted wrongdoing, that I would be treated in the right way and that my concerns would be addressed. And if we can't be in a working environment where we can't do the right thing, then aren't we all doomed to be rather unethical in our own sort of way?
Yeah, well, that lands perfectly on kind of the next section, because I've got a question down here about, are we creating fraudsters or dishonest people? And what I'm listening to from you, and I'm sitting here thinking, is it sounds like, be it fintech sector, be it wider, maybe lots of sectors, leadership teams, C-suite need more training on fraud risk and the creation of fraud risk, and the I suppose about the functionality of whistleblowing, as much as not just it's there, but actually, is it functional? Do people understand how it works? Do they trust how it works? I remember seeing an anecdote. Someone said, if you see a speak up poster, and it's the same thing every time, you just start to ignore it. You don't remember it's there's like a 20-mile-per-hour speed sign. Sign. People see them. We know when they go at 20, and I bet you if I got everyone to put their hands up and said who's gone over 20 and driving their car in a 20-mile-per-hour zone, no one here would, of course, admit it because we're recording. But otherwise, it's a sense of apathy. So that kind of career advancement, we've touched on this. If people are getting promoted because they're politically savvy and others are just doing their job well, and it's a meritocracy, the politically savvy ones are aligning themselves with the decision makers playing the games, I suppose. Is there anything wrong with that? Is there anything wrong if someone just says, right, you know what, I know that the people who can make the decision about my promotion are those, so I'm just going to play that game of make sure I go to the events they want. I'm always going to be the yes person to that person. And then you've got the other person who just says, I'm just going to do the best I can do with my job and be good to everybody. Anything wrong with being political savvy in the workplace? Anything wrong with promoting that in the workplace?
I think it depends on who you ask. Because if you ask the person who's being savvy, then they might either know that they're doing it, or they genuinely might not know. I wouldn't believe them, but they might not know. And then if you ask other people who aren't, then they might say, well, they're just being themselves, and that isn't my style, therefore that's the end of it. So I think that comes down to, like, who are you asking? And it isn't a legal thing in that you don't have to do things that way. So I think that it all boils down to the individual and who you ask, because no one's ever going to agree. But you can probably imagine that the people who are savvy and have got a very long way because of it will say there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, because look at me, and I think that it's one of those issues where actually I think it's only a problem when it becomes a problem.
So would it be a problem? So when you, in your thesis, is this something that would feature, the dark arts of career promotion versus meritocracy? Is that something that features on insider fraud risk?
Yeah, because I think at the start my thesis focused on the technological side of things. So the controls that you can have, like access restrictions and vetting processes, that sort of thing. But then the more I spoke to people, actually yes, they spoke about the controls from a technological standpoint to an extent, but then the conversation purely went to the individual, which I understand, because you can have the best tech in the world, but if you know someone who can bypass the controls, then what's the point in having the tech? So I think you need to have a balance of both, but then the deterrent factors are essentially just words on paper. And to what extent can a deterrent actually be deterrent-y enough? That's not a word, but it will be soon. Like, how can you get people to be scared off, to be discouraged by a deterrent, unless you fully understand the risk? And I think that if companies don't teach their staff that an insider fraud attack could result in no bonuses, layoffs, offboarding customers, staff, etc.
Yeah.
If you put it into a relatable situation, then I think people might think, oh, hang on a second, if I don't do my bit, I might not get a bonus next year. And I think if you start to make it relatable to them and tell them how it can impact them directly, then I think that's sort of the first step in how you manage to deter people from a personal perspective. Whereas if you just write in a policy that if you commit fraud, we will send you to undisciplinary, and further action will be undecided. All right. So I think it needs that, as you say, like a really in-depth understanding of the risk, but that won't come until people acknowledge that insider fraud is a problem in the first place. So it's like a massive circle, basically.
And I don't think that acknowledgement comes around. I did a talk maybe 4 or 5 years ago at the Midlands Fraud Forum, and it was on it was again about leadership and committing fraud, or having an influence, not research. There's a book by a professor over in the US, Eugene Soltes, and he wrote a book called Why They Do It. And he looked at like these 50 pillars of American business society, and many of them had turned out to be committing white collar crime. And he went and interviewed a bunch of them, said, okay, why have you done it? Why have you guys committed fraud? And there was lots of answers, but things like proximity, they weren't close to the victims or so on, their company committed fraud against. But some of the things they talked about was overconfidence and working in a highly charged corporate environment, which the irony was the leaders had created themselves. So, it sounds like if leaders can't work out themselves that they're creating a highly charged environment of risk, certain ways of working your way to the top, they are creating like an apathy to dishonesty. They're allowing certain levels of conduct and behavior. So in the workplace, how can you build controls around that? Is it really about getting under the fingernails of training leadership teams about how they can actually influence bad behavior without knowing it?
I think that training's a huge part of it, but then I think this is a potential avenue for further research, because actually, how do you put a control in place that can track culture, that can track the need to progress, the need to do better, the need to get to where you want to be? I don't have the answers to that yet. That'll be my next PhD, Aaron. It's fine.
Yeah, so you've got time to do another PhD.
It's fine. So I think that's a really interesting one, actually. How do you put controls around something that you can't necessarily quantify? How do you implement thresholds? How do you choose the thresholds? So I think that's one that I don't have the answer on, but that's one that I think could be really interesting in the future, especially if we focus on the individual being the key inside a fraud risk. I think there's a misconception that technology is the risk. To an extent, I think that's true, but I think the people are the weak link, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know yet how you put controls in place around an unquantifiable thing. And I think that also comes down to, you know, say someone were to look at our LinkedIn pages. Heaven forbid they look at mine. They'd be like, "Oh, this is depressing." I wonder if, I'm trying to work out how to say this. Like, I'm not being pressured, nor do I work in an environment where I feel the need to be better. This is all on me. I'm not being told by senior staff or my and colleagues, and I don't think I ever have been, actually. I'm fortunate to not feel the need to perform better at work because my manager says so. Everything I put on LinkedIn is because of me. It's not because I'm being told to do so, or I'm being told that I need to be better, do better. That's all from my brain. And so I think that if you were to look at someone's LinkedIn as well, I think there's also that further investigation that might be needed to say, well, actually, is Claire doing this because she feels like she needs to, because she's under pressure from her employer? Or is it because she's a bit weird and she does too much all the time? So I think there's that sort of balance as well.
Yeah, it's hard because, you know, there are, well, I'm the same as you. I decide what I do in a day. It's up to me if we want to drive one strategy or do have the Coalface or whatever I put on LinkedIn. I'm not doing it because someone's telling me to do it. 'Cause, you know, it's the place I run. Couple of things that jumped out of that before we just try and grab some questions, because I'm conscious I want to make sure everyone can get away on time. You made the really good point that, you know, controls, you know, working out how much to invest in controls is really hard when you can't quantify the loss, which is the, oh my God, everything's gone down there. Bear with me. It's my usual dance in the middle of this. I've got to figure this out, this automatic. At least I'm environmentally conscious and, you know, the lights go out. You know, it's hard to quantify how much you're going to save on fraud by putting in controls. And that always seems to be one of the challenges I get on pushback. If it's at the front end of building controls, it's, well, we don't know how much we're going to save from investing this money, so let's not invest it, or let's do it on a reduced scale. Something you mentioned about, firstly, looking at insider threat and looking at technology, but it's really about people. It reminds me of something Tony Sales said on our first episode when we did procurement fraud. He said he hasn't seen a computer go to prison yet, and it's always down to people. So I think there's some really good insights, and, you know, we know the good insights because they're echoed as well by others as well as yourself, which is great. We've got about 6 minutes left, so I'm just going to go into the chat and see what we've got. I've seen one of our other lovely former guests, Dr. Liz Carter, has been.
I knew she'd be first to comment. I knew it.
I knew Liz. Liz is sitting there smiling, laughing, an evil laugh at us now. I think there might just be comments. I'm going to Liz, I'm just going to read out what you said. I think for me, there is a fundamental unfairness about the not what you know, but who you know way to move up the career ladder. I agree with that. And you end up with talk the talk, not walk the walk management and leadership, which is really rubbish to have a corporate operating under. So thank you. Yeah, I like that book as well. And Liz, you've also said, I am one of the ones that doesn't do things the usual expected way, and I don't fit the right boxes for promotion. I absolutely want a promotion, but I just can't and won't sacrifice the work I do or ethical standpoint. And yeah, I mean, that resonates with me as well. I left DWF where I worked before, and I'm on great terms with them. My old boss, who still sends me conflicts and work, who's a lovely guy. And I just couldn't cope with the pressure I was putting myself under to be a good dad at the time to two young kids. My dad was ill in hospital. and doing the work I thought I needed to do to succeed, but I couldn't do it any other way than just get my head down and just do the best I could. And that was my way of dealing with it. But I caused my own kind of degree of burnout, I suppose, with the same type of issues. But I think there's a lot of advocacy out there, isn't there, for just staying true to yourself and being yourself in the workplace. Kevin, you've put in a question, I think, but does that political savviness versus being great at what you do not play out in many sales areas or even industries? How often does aligning yourself with the decision makers, socially entertaining, prevail over the best product service for the buying of an organization as a whole? I think it does quite a lot. Sorry, there's two questions in here, but I'll deal with that. I mean, I think it does. I think companies lose out on opportunities if they just go to the people who curry favors within the business. Do you tend to agree with that, Claire?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How likely do we think it is that elements of fraudulent behavior can leak into the whole sales cycle given this? And how do you think you can make large scale change to this? Wow.
Join us next week and we'll discuss this.
Yeah, join us next week, we'll discuss. Someone's asked what the book title was again. Eugene Soltes, Soltes, Why They Do It. He was a professor at Harvard Business School. And that almost brings us to the end. So thank you for everyone who stuck around. I know people have had to drop off a little bit, but great to see so many of you stuck around. Just the wrap up stuff. Claire Maillet, I could pronounce your name. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me time. I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you making time for this. Because I know a lot of people ask you, and it's not always a yes. I think we've established, if anything, you're busy. Everyone who's attended, thank you for making time. I really appreciate it. I know there are so many things, and it's great if you two. Hopefully, you've taken something out of this that can help you. As you know, we will send out a follow-up on this session, and we do this in every session, where we send a copy of the recording to anyone who's registered and a PDF of the key learnings from today's session, things we talked about. Thank you for making time to come and see that. We will also share with you a feedback questionnaire, which is also, I think, Paula, my colleagues, put in the chat. If you've got time just to click on that link and just give us some feedback, including on kind of things you'd like to hear us chat about. So there's no slides in our at the Coalface session, just a chat with whoever fancies having a chat about the subject. You should get the email in a week or two in terms of the follow-up. And the next session I'm aiming for is early December. And I'm trying to get an investigative journalist who works in ITN, has done something with Panorama before, to talk about how investigations look from a journalistic perspective compared to how I see them from a legal perspective. So that will be the next one, hopefully in the first week of December. And there you go. I'll give you a minute back of your life. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to join. And yeah, catch you, I guess, on LinkedIn, if not on emails or somewhere else.
Probably, yeah.
Claire, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.